Hey guys, what's up? So today I wanted to make a video about XO by XLN Audio. This has been a highly requested video just because there's not a lot on this, especially when it comes to like workflow, how to use it. So I wanted to really make a video that covered some of those topics today. So really quickly, if you guys haven't checked this out before, yeah, I mean, this is a really cool plugin. Mainly, it is a plugin that is used for more of the organizational side of samples. This is more with like drum or like one shot. So like if you have one shot effects, cymbals, hi-hats, snares, percussion, toms, any of that kind of stuff. This is where you're going to be able to really quickly glance over all of your samples, right? I prefer this, and I've shown a lot of students this. And they immediately, it catches their eyes because of this, this like universe where you can see all of your samples. But I found that this was, for me, a more intuitive way than, going through menus. I mean, this still has its practicality, but again, this is just a whole lot funner to be able to drag your cursor and immediately hear all of these sounds in context. So that's the biggest thing. Obviously here you can load your samples. So when you first open XO, you're going to be able to, if you click this little folder menu, you're going to be able to add your own custom routing for your own folders where all of your samples lie. Now, XO comes with some samples right out of the gate, so that's always awesome too. You get, a pretty decent amount of sounds, and they're all in different genres, right? Like, there's some hip hop stuff, there's hip hop patterns, all that kind of stuff. But mainly, I like this for the fact that I can, I have a big sample library, so to be able to route that there is just amazing and have all of my drum one shots in one area. So obviously here we have the space tab. So the space tab is where we're going to be able to see at a glance all of our samples, right? We can navigate around here. We can zoom in very close and see all the different samples. Now, the way that they're stacked together, right? You see all these little dots. Well, the closer that they are together, the more similar that they sound tonally, right? So like, let's go. Right? Like these kind of sounds are relative to each other. That's why they're close together. And I think they do this based off of frequency, whether it's low or high frequency content, right? But it's really cool. So again, one of the coolest features about this is the fact that you can kind of just drag and drop. But as you see here in the space tab, right, we have this similarity bar. Now, this is one of the things that appealed to me the most when I first learned about XO. And that's the fact that, like, say we are in context, we're listening to our track and we're trying to, the melodic part of the track, and we're trying to select drums that work, right? And we're going around, and we land on a sample that we kind of like, right? And it kind of works in context. Maybe, there might be some things about the sample that just don't work, right? But the cool thing is we have this similarity bar. So if we use the arrow keys on our computer or our keyboard, right? If we use the right and left tab, we can switch between samples, right? So and as you can tell, a lot of those samples have the same kind of timbre and the same kind of sound. So that makes it really handy to find different variations that could possibly work, especially with snares, right? Right, so you can find a cool amount of variations, and you search through all of these different like similar sounds, which is really cool. Now, let's say you find a sound that you like, right? Let's say we find this. We can use the short list menu here, so we can add this to the short list, right? And now that's there for us to kind of switch between, or say we're trying to we can't decide between a couple of samples that are in our library and we're trying to find the best one. This is where we can put the many different samples in our short list. We can just click add, and now we have those two samples that we can kind of pick from. So that's all good, right? We can obviously search through stuff. Here in this magnifying glass icon here, you're going to be able to use the search filter. So you can move this around or whatever you want to do with it. But this is where you can get really refined with your searches. So if you're looking for a specific element for your drums, let's say you're looking for only snares, when you click snare, it's going to eliminate all of the other sounds here. So when you drag around, you're only going to hear, for the most part, snare sounds, right? It's really cool on how XO does this. It uses both metadata, but it also, I'm guessing it uses some type of listening ability to be able to understand frequency, right? Because I also have frequency sliders here. So, if I'm looking for more of a darker tonal snare, or maybe just something that has more body, I can pull this slider down. Right, and those are like more darker tonal snares. And then if I pull this up, it's going to give me more higher frequency content stuff. So that's handy, right? Like especially if you know what gaps you have in your frequency content when you're adding your new samples in, which is really cool. They also have a length tab, so you can get really quick samples, ones that are just really attacky, or you can have full length samples. I don't think there's a drum sample that's 20 seconds long, but you get my point, right? Also, you have this like a drumminess slider. So this, what I've noticed is like the more that you drag this up, right, you get more. And if you drag this down, right, those are like less sounds that you would clarify as a traditional sound in your kit. Doesn't mean you can't still use them, but they don't really resemble drum sounds, right? So that's a cool feature too, to be able to quickly do that, especially when it comes to like the sound effects, right? Because you can have like all kinds of different one shots in here, but if you want things that are more drummy, see, those are more practical for like a drum kit. Now, if I was to wanting to have like a one shot that was just a simple effect, that was maybe like a voice or something. So you get it, right? So it's really cool with this drumminess slider. We can kind of refine those searches, and then we can kind of search by the time that we add it. I use that less. The cool thing here is we can kind of also eliminate our searches based off of like our actual folders that we're routing to. So like I said, when we come here, those are the folders that I have routing to XO from my hard drive. But like I said, we can eliminate which ones we want to hear. So like I can hear just my loop cloud library if I wanted to, the samples inside of that, or I can just go through my Beatmaker folder that's on my SSD, right? So it's really cool. You can really refine that. I think one of the funnest things about this too is because of the naming conventions on the samples that you bring into this, they're searchable. So especially if you're bringing in samples that have come from a sample pack, or like a genre specific, sample pack or provider, you can type in, for instance, like trap, right? That's a genre that I make a lot. So if I were to type that in and say, I'm looking for just trap kicks, right? Right. That allows us to search for things with that same metadata, right? So I have trap, and if you look here in this bottom tab, when I select a sound, you're seeing that in the naming conventions, right? It's saying trap step ultra pack, or let's see, where's the word trap in this one? Yeah, trap ultra pack, right? So again, if you have that in your naming conventions, you can really find your samples, or if you remember what they're called. Another thing you can do with each individual sample is you can favorite it, right? So I can favorite this sample. And when I have my favorite selected, it's going to show me other favorites that I have favorited. So again, after time of doing this, right, granted, this is my new computer, so I don't have all of my favorites kind of transferred over. But, as you do this and you stack up favorites, now when you click that button, it's going to only show you your favorite sounds, especially with that tag. So especially if you have you put trap in, and it's only going to show you the ones that you favorited that have to do also with that metadata search, which is really awesome. I love that. And again, it just makes the discovering samples just really fun, because again, you can just, and this is all while you can have, the actual track playing in the background while you're picking these sounds. So that kind of covers most of like the basic search functions here. And again, this is the space tab. So this is where, like, if you want to come in and kind of just, mess around and find something that works, or you're looking for something specific that works with a song that you're referencing, this is like the perfect place to start. Really just kind of move around, stop on something you like. You also have the ability, like, let's say you do that and you hear something that you liked, but you move so far away from it, you can't really get back there, right? Like I was saying, with the side keys, left and right, we have the ability to do similar sounds. With the up and down key, we have the ability to go back in history. So if you cursored over something that you really liked, but you can't find it, again, just use your up and down key, and that's going to be the thing that allows you to go back through your history of the sounds. And the cool thing is, as you're going back through the history, you can also go sideways, right? And find similar sounds, or go back and do the same thing. So it's really, really intuitive, and really fun. So again, you can kind of do this without the idea that you're gonna, go over something and lose it. You can always kind of go back and find what sound you kind of ran over. So that's cool. So how do we get sounds like out of this, or how do we work with the sounds, right? So the cool thing about XO is, not only is it this really cool environment to find your samples, but we can also sequence inside of here, right? So if we click the edit tab, this is going to bring us into a more advanced menu. So the way I like to think about it is the left side is more like sound design and really tweaking your sounds to get them right. And the right side is going to be your sequencer. So this is where, like, you could program all of the sounds that you're using and create patterns, all that great stuff. So me personally, I think one of the downsides to XO is the fact that you only have these A and B patterns, and it doesn't really, I think the most that it prints out is like a 4-bar loop. And I mean, I may be wrong on that, but it's really a short pattern, right? So I use this mainly as a starting point to either start off MIDI patterns that I really like and then edit from there, or to create stems, which we'll go into in a second. And that allows me to, organize my beat however I like, and then just get a really good starting point. So the cool thing about XO here is, no matter what BPM we're working at, we can, like, literally, drag this up to whatever BPM we want to be working in. That comes in handy if we were opening this as a standalone kind of application, because it is a standalone application as well as a VST, but I have it open as a VST here, right? So if I'm going to use this traditionally, like how I would use it in my workflow in FL Studio, I would click the sync button. And when I click the sync button, that's automatically going to sync to my DAW's BPM. So that's really cool, right? And then we also have the ability to either, halftime that, double that speed. That's a cool factor. But now when I hit play, and if I was to hit my, metronome and press that, you can see that that's in time, right? So that's really cool. So we can have that set up to be running while our track is going. So we can set like a 4-bar loop or 8-bar loop, whatever you want, have some melodic kind of components going, and then we can, build our drums on top of that and kind of get a feel for what the sounds are going to be doing. Now, yes, we can pull the sounds out and we can use them in our own, DAW, whether that's the sequencer in FL Studio or that's just in the arrangement window here in any of your DAWs, whether that's FL Studio, Studio One, what it may be, right? But the cool thing about actually sequencing in here is you get a lot of cool effects and an ability to kind of add some groove and swing and modulation to your groove beats before they're actually in your DAW. So like I was saying, so it's cool. So in this edit tab here, you have the ability to do that, right? Sequence and kind of do some sound design stuff here. And it's all kind of linked to all of these pads here on the side. And this is how we can build our kits, right? So we have a kit already loaded up. What I'm gonna do is I'm gonna go into the presets and just start fresh. I'm gonna go to the very top and hit init. That's gonna initialize the patch for us. Click that plus button. So we have effectively nothing in these slots, right? We're working with a blank slate. So when we come in and we're working like this, what I like to do, so there's two things. We could either come from the space and pick sounds that we like and put them into these tabs here, right? So we can do that all from the space menu. So say if I wanted to replace that open hi-hat, find one that I like, just replace it like that. So now we have that open hi-hat here, that kick there, right? And we can kind of just build a kit by just moving around and putting sounds there, right? So that's really cool. But another way to do that is we can do that from this menu as well. So in the edit tab, all we have to do is click this little, the green icon or the blue icon, whatever it is, this little dot here. You click it and it's gonna open up the space menu again. So it's going to allow you to change this in context. Now, why you would use this over just going to the space tab and just doing this, right? And replacing your samples that way, is that when we do it this way, say if I created a pattern, right? And if I was to click this little dot and change my sound this way, I can still hear the pattern that I set up in the sequencer, right? So and this is really awesome because this allows me in context of the beat to understand how the sound is going to work in context with the kit. And this is something that I talk about all the time, right? Of the pattern not necessarily being the thing that makes or breaks the beat, it's the sounds. You can have the same pattern in different sounds and get a completely different vibe, right? So again, it allows you to create patterns here, right? So we can do something, like this, for instance, and we can replace those samples there. So let's just mute these. Right, so as you can see, we can really start to stack up sounds and build a pattern that we really like. So that's cool and all, but one of the most awesome things about this, especially when we start to build up our kits, is we can save our own patterns in our own kits. So as we do that, as we start to build these patterns, we can have these different kits and these different sounds to pick from as great starting points, especially when, you just start cooking up a beat, right? Or like making any type of production. You have a really good starting point with different tempos. Now there's some that are already built in as far as presets, right? There's a ton of different, genres as well. And you have user presets as well that you can go through, right? So as you build these, right, you're going to have all of these different sounds here, right? All of these different sounds with these different patterns. Now that's great. So how do we get these? How do we get like the sounds or the patterns that we make inside of XO out inside of our DAW, right? So now there's multiple ways to do that. Now I've seen other people use this as kind of like, right, they find a sound that they like, and instead of using the sequencer inside of XO, what they do is they might find a sound that they really like. They might open their sequencer and they might just hit Option, click drag, and they might just drag out that sample, right? So now I have that sample here, and in FL Studio, I can just start sequencing that, right? So super cool. We can do it that way. That workflow is totally fine. That works, right? Or like I said, we can build patterns inside of XO. And once we build them inside of XO and we're happy with that, we can hit this little function here, which is our export button. So once we hit that, it opens the export pane where we can actually start rendering stems. So we just hit this little magic button, render waves. Now what it does is it does a couple things here. So first off, it gives us access to the individual stems, the individual pieces, right? So if we wanted the raw unprocessed sounds, like the ones that are just straight in the space when we're clicking through and finding the thing, right? We have the access to that. So we can either drag out the whole raw kit if we wanted to, right? Or we can drag out the process kit. And that means anything that we do here in this sound design tab where we're, maybe boosting the attack envelope, or we are, creating, pitch shifts or tonal shifts, or we're messing with the pan or the envelope, right? There's a lot of control that we have within the editing portion of XO, but anything that we do there, right? So when we hit that little render stems or render waves tab, we're going to get all of those process sounds in our kit. So we're going to be able to, when we drag this out, this is going to be all of the changes that we made with this edit function, right? So we have all of the samples there, and we can start programming and using MIDI from there, right? So that's another way that we can do that. Or another way, which I've seen, this is actually a way that I use it a lot, and I've seen a lot of other people use it this way, is they pull the stems. So you can pull individual stems, or you can pull all the stems into your playlist, which is just really awesome because it gives you, again, a great starting point here to build patterns. And again, I do a lot of audio editing rather than MIDI sometimes. So you can come in here and you can make certain edits and cuts to what you're doing, right? And just make it a whole lot, different variations, right? And cutting different pieces and moving things around. And that's that's the way that my brain works when I use XO, right? So I create maybe just a little variation or a little pattern that kind of has some movement and it works with my track. And then I can pull the stems out and I can kind of do edits from there. I can come back into XO, change some things, render some more stems and pull them in, right? So that's kind of the way that I like to work. But you also have the ability to bring out the full beat as a wave. So I don't like to do this personally. It's going to be different for everybody, but I like to have control over all of the sounds. And again, if you pull them out as one wave, you're not going to have that level of control, especially if they're not mixed, or if it's just, there's things that you want to do as far as processing to your drums. You're not going to have a total lot of control if you use the beat as a wave. So I never really do that function. And then we have this, beat as MIDI, and I've seen this function as well. But again, this is something that I don't really use all too much, just because I think it's kind of a pain. And also you have to make sure that your MIDI is set up in a way that works for other drum machines or things that you're pulling in, for instance, with all of these different MIDI patterns. So just to kind of show you what I'm talking about, like if I was to take a sampler and I was just to take this MIDI and I drag this MIDI here onto the sampler, and I was to open that up in a piano roll, you see we have all kinds of different MIDI here, but this can get a little confusing, especially, like I said, if your drum machine isn't necessarily set up the same way that XO is set up, as far as the way that you set it up with all of the sounds, right? So that can be a little tricky for some people. Another thing that I've seen done is, instead of leaving everything on necessarily when they render it. I've also seen that people do this, for instance. Well, they'll mute all of these tracks here. Let's say I only wanted to get the MIDI from this kick, right? Now I've seen it where they do this, right? Now when I come back to this menu, instead of seeing all of those multicolors, I see just the kick MIDI here. So now if I was to come back to the sampler and let's erase all of this, right? And I open back up XO, I pull this MIDI and throw it on the sampler. Well, now I'm only going to have the kick pattern there. So it makes it a little bit easier, especially like, let's say the sampler was a kick sample and you had it, working more as an individual, a sampler with individual sound inside of it, like a container. It lends itself better to this workflow. It gets less congested. So yeah, that's kind of a pain to have to do that for every kind of sound and pattern, but this is one of the workarounds that I found for it. So this is like a really cool way of, just transferring the MIDI, which again, I say that I really don't use that function all too much, but it's there, right? Another thing that I found out with XO2 that you can do is, let's say, for instance, let's initialize the patch again. Let's just add some random, samples in here. Let's go to the space. I'm just going to put random samples in. So yeah, we have random samples in there, and I'm just kind of showing this as an illustration here, but what we can do is we can actually come into XO and we can use the piano roll inside of XO. We just got to find the sounds. It's probably going to be in C3. Cool. So as you can see, we can find the sounds in the piano roll, which is, for me, again, it's not worth it to me, but you can use XO here. If we go back to this edit tab. So we can use XO and find the actual starting point. Oh, these are muted, that's why. If we unmute these. So we can make patterns with this, right? If we're inside of this kind of pane. So this is another way that you can use, XO to program your own kind of drums there. Again, I don't use this method at all because I find it's just too much work. And again, the workaround there is, yes, we can use the piano roll inside of FL Studio to write us in our own patterns, and that's great and all, but then we still have to route each of these individual sounds to our mixer. So the one reason I don't like doing it that way is the fact that we would still have to route each individual sound to its own mixer track. Now, XO kind of made that a little bit easier with this whole function here where we can select the output bus so we can have it routed to, one of 8 different outputs. This allows us to link it to our mixer and have the individual tracks be different so we can have different types of processing. Now, again, this is just a lot of work to set up. Now, if you set it up beforehand and maybe save it as a template, I could see that being the thing that works here and making this workaround a little bit better. But again, you just have to, there's a lot that you have to do to route. So like you can see here, we have in FL Studio, and I'm sure this is going to be different in other DAWs, right? But here I would have to engage every single one of these, right? All the way up to the 8 bus. I would have to assign that a mixer track. So master would be 1. And then we have 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. You get it, right? This is kind of painful to do this every single time. But if this is the workflow you choose, it's effective in that way. So if you do the setup ahead of time, I come here to my sounds, I route this to, let's route all to the buses. Right, and so we have that pattern going, but if I was to now open up my mixer, you could see all the different sounds here on the actual mixer track. So I have more control over them with this kick. You know, I could EQ it a little bit. And that's cool, right? So we can use XO as a pattern, right? So I can put in the pattern here. I have XO, and I can just build more and more and build onto my drum groove using XO. Now the coolest part about using it this way is the fact that we can come in and we can still change those sounds. So it's really cool. We could build our patterns in context to our beat or our melody or whatever it is, and we can still have the ability to change out the sounds without rendering the stems and doing it the way I showed you before, where, okay, now I want to change something, but now I have to go all the way back to XO, re-put in the pattern, re-find a sound, and then re-stem it out. So this is kind of a cool workflow, but again, it's one of those things where if you're wanting to use XO like this, I would kind of set that up ahead of time and save that as a template. That way, you can just easily come into the piano roll and just program things from there, and then you can come back into XO and change the sounds that you want, which makes that honestly one of the most effective ways to use this, because then you have control over everything. And you don't have to do the whole, like FL Studio normally, where you have to take the pattern and you have to split it. You actually have a lot more control because you can still go into the mixer, change things, alter things, and you still have the ability to create variations of patterns, right? So I can take this and I can pull this, have pattern 2 be a little bit different, or just, erase everything if I wanted to. And we still have everything in pattern 1. So again, really game changer if that's kind of the workflow that you want with it, right? So really quickly, let me jump back in. So like I was saying, we can build sounds, and that's kind of one of the coolest parts about using the sampler, or I'm sorry, it's one of the coolest parts about using the sequencer inside of XO, is we get a lot of cool little amazing, I would say, features as far as finding new samples that we wouldn't necessarily use, right? So really quickly, I'm just going to take this pattern here. I don't really know what it sounds like, but we're going to take the pattern. Cool. So we got that pattern going. That's really fun in general. Is we have 2 things, right? We have the sample combiner. Now the sample combiner is a really cool feature, right? So just like in the space tab, where we had that similarity tab at the bottom where we can use our left and our right arrow keys to toggle between, similar sounds that work together, we have the ability to do that with all of the sounds at the same time. So this is kind of where XO kind of becomes a game changer, because yes, we can, curate our own kits and find sounds that work together. But again, happy accidents are literally just amazing sometimes. Like, you could not plan for these types of things, right? So as we play our sequence that, this pattern calls for, right, we can switch between are different sounds. We can also randomize the sounds, right? And that's really cool. For me, though, I think where it's really powerful is when if we were to have an initialize preset, right? And let's just create just a random pattern here. Let's do something like that. So we have like just a really simple pattern here. Now the cool thing about it is if we liked those samples initially that we chose, right? Now it's going to find samples that are in the same general ballpark now, right? We could randomize. And let's say we find one we like let's say we like that snare and we like the hat and we just want the kick drum to change, right? We can lock those in place. Until we find something we like, and then we can save that, right? So that's always fun. Another cool thing too is we have that same ability, but we have it down here, where instead of having finite control over which samples are changing at any given time, we have this like quick and dirty switch here where it changes all of them, and you can see we can lock them on top here. So those ones were locked previously, so I can just unlock them. Where this becomes really powerful is when we're working with patterns again, with sounds that we may not necessarily like, right? That's what I was saying earlier is sometimes it's not the pattern, it's the sound. So if we just listen to this one. Cool, right? Now let's change some of those sounds here. And we can actually refine the search. So based off of our search criterias, this is going to kind of guide our sample combiner and this switch down here to change all of the samples. So for instance, if I was to type in trap here, it's only going to find sounds that are relative with that, right? Now that's an awesome thing, right? We can really find combinations of samples that we may not have thought to put together in the first place, which is really fun. Again, happy accidents are always fun when we come across them. Another thing here that we have is on this left side we have the beat combiner, and this is where things kind of get crazy. So with the beat combiner, with each individual sound we can actually affect the pattern that's being played at any given time. So really quickly, just like the sample combiner, we have the ability to just switch all of the sounds at once. We can switch individual sounds and individual patterns at any given time, or we can just randomize and it's going to pick random things. And again, happy accidents, right? It's a happy accident machine. So what we're going to do is we're going to play it and we're going to just switch between some stuff and see how that affects the pattern. Now that also in combination with this, we can get a lot of different cool variations. I use this a lot of the time for like if I wanted to create some fill percussion. So like at the end of a bar or something, I might have a pattern in. I might just literally have the hats do a new fill with just this template, right? So if I was to click here, right? So we have the ability to, come in there, add some new variation with this beat combiner. And now if we wanted just to revert back to the original pattern we just click here, right? And that's the original pattern. But again, this really calls for like really cool happy accidents. So that's the beat combiner, and that also helps you like find new variations and new patterns and new rhythmic devices that you can use for your tracks. Now, a couple cool things to talk about as we make our way through all of the different sections is going to be some of the stuff here at the bottom. So on the right hand side, like I was saying, this is where we can sequence our patterns. So we have a few different controls here to add a couple different bits of variation and movement to our patterns. So the first thing we have here is we have the A-B switch, right? So like I was saying, we're limited to 2 patterns here. Obviously here we have 16 steps here, and same with the B, right? So if we have it just set to A, it's only going to play A. If we have it set to B, it's only going to show us what's here in B. And if we have it set to A, B, or A, B, it's going to play those different sequences based off of the order that you choose. So A, B, and it's going to play the B side. And in the B side, we can change a few things, right? We can add some variation. I might take some stuff away here just to give it a different feel. Yeah, let's just do something like that. So that adds us a little bit more room to, create some complex patterns. But really, that's my biggest gripe about this section here is the fact that it's only an A and a B pattern. I mean, the longest that we can get it is A, B. And I just think that XLN needs to fix that. It needs to be longer. But, right, so that's a way that we can add some variation to our pattern and kind of make it a little bit longer. Now below that, we have the Accentuator tab. So in the Accentuator tab, it's really cool. So what it kind of does is it uses like volume shaping to add movement. So based off of the kind of groove that we're going for, whether it's like a 1/8 or, a 1/4, and we can combine these together, but we can create some really intricate movement. So let's say, 1/8. So as you can see, as we move this accentuator knob, it's emphasizing like on the higher peaks, there's louder volume there, and it's almost kind of adding some side chain movement there, where it's, accentuating these beats here. One, the two, all of these down beats here. And so we can affect that differently. We can mix and match, these different timings to get really complex emphasis and grooves, right? So we can just option click to kind of reset everything. But like I was saying, you can have even like some triplet movement there. Inverse it. You can do a whole lot. So this kind of adds some accentuation to your groove, can give you some more syncopated kind of movement and motion while you're, creating your pattern. Now here on the right side, we have what is called like the groove section. So individually, we can affect all of these different, the groove, right? Essentially. So we have a global knob where if I drag this up, as you can see, it's dragging them up for everything. So if we're wanting to add just, a small amount of groove to our whole track, we can do that. We can also do it by the individual kind of levels or layers to our sounds. So like for our clap, snare, all we have to do is we click here. This becomes enabled, and now we can drag that swing amount and that groove amount. And we can also set the type of swing. So we have, a bunch of different types here that, again, we can use to add some different flavors to our track. So we can change these and we can dial them in exactly how we want to. So we have that ability to add some groove either individually or, to the whole thing. We also have the ability to nudge samples back and forth in time. So, if we want just more of a relaxed groove or more of like an anxious, stepping forward before the beat actually comes, we can kind of do that and achieve that with these switches here. Right, and we can give it kind of a different flavor there. So that's what we can do here with these swing knobs. And just remember all of this that you affect here, even the accentuator, the swing knobs, all of that's going to actually be baked into your stems on the processed stems. So just be aware, everything that you do here and down here, that will be baked in when we go to render our stems here at the end. Now, on to this section, this is where we have our effects section. So there's a couple different effects that are built in. In my opinion, nothing to kind of ring home about. We have some reverbs and some delays just to basically add some movement and some space to our tracks. And we can kind of set them up on, we have two aux effects channels, right? So we have effects 1, effects 2, the same effects, right? And we can kind of set them differently. So this allows us here when we're doing, our editing for each of our individual samples in this effect send trigger, we can feed more into effects slot 1, or we could feed more into effects slot 2, which makes it really, really cool, where we can add some processing inside of XO before we even pull anything out, which is cool. But again, I like to have immense control when I'm doing stuff like reverbs and delays. So maybe for like a quick and dirty kind of thing, you can do that. Me personally, I like to pull it out and have that have that control. Also, if you do the option that we were talking about earlier, as far as routing things to your mixer and having them on the individual channels while everything is playing, right? This gives you far more control with, whatever reverbs that you want to add, whether those are the third-party reverbs that you own or just more, control as far as dialing that in with EQs and, treating it kind of like a send effect, right? So I don't use too much of that down here, but you do have that ability. So that's really cool. Like I was saying, you have different kind of controls here for the tone, the level of the reverbs, all of that kind of stuff. To the left of the two auxiliary effects, we have, it's more of like a saturation unit, I would call it. So here, if we click crunch, this is where we can add some saturation to our sound. So now it comes with transformer style knock, which obviously it gives it some more like weight and some more like transient energy. Um, I don't know what these actually do. I've never really used them. More 808, more 909, fuzzy. I've used the fuzzy one, degrade, retro, bit. So you have a bunch of these different styles of saturation. And you could just feed that, you know, into the master level. So that's always fun too. So we can really you know, affect everything and kind of add some cohesion to our drum loop, so it kind of sounds more like it belongs in the pocket together. We also have some filter sections here, so this is where I can, you know, create you know, a high pass filter to cut out some of that accentuated bass or the lows that might not be needed, and same with, you know, a low pass here, you know, on the top, cutting that away, cutting out the highs. We can do that, right? We can turn that on and off. Then we have a soft clipping feature, right? So this allows us to get a little bit more weight out of our, you know, perceived loudness, right? The sound floor. We can actually raise that up. We have all of these controls here. That's great. We also have like a master pitch control. So this changes the whole pitch of the kit if we wanted to do that for whatever reason, and also the level here. So it's pretty, you know, awesome to have these effects. But again, I rarely use these. Like I find myself using this less and less because I have third-party plugins that I'd rather use on my drums or, you know, on my individual sounds to kind of process them. And I find these to really lack the control that I need to do what I need to do sometimes, right? So I generally don't use these effects, but they're there if you want to use them, right? So like I was saying, all of these effects that you do, whether it's the Accentuator, the two auxiliary effects channels that you have, the sends, right, or, you know, the master effects that you have, when you go to export, that is going to be baked into your stems. So in your stems, you're going to have those there. Also with the process sounds, all of that processing is going to be there. Now, if you wanted the original ones, like I said, you can just grab them here. So that's kind of the main gist here. Another thing too is, like, let's say you wanted to create some, maybe either some sample packs, or you're wanting to create just a kit that you could just always come to and remember, you know, right off the bat, maybe start off a template with it, or just have it in a folder that's easy accessible for maybe you have multiple DAWs, right? Now what we can do is we can set an export folder, so we can create our own unique folder paths, name them whatever we want to, and then everything that we export, we can have that exported there. So whether that's the individual one shots or the stems could all be in a file folder that just makes sense for you. And then we have some normalization functions here where we can make sure that the sounds that come out are at a standard loudness. Now, I don't really do that, but you can, right? You have the options to do that. Now, I think that covers for majority of the use cases of using this, right? What I've seen, at least on YouTube, is there's not a lot of videos about the workflow, and I hope that, you know, I covered a lot of that today. Yes, I would say that this plugin is amazing. Again, there's different ways to utilize this plugin. Now, like I said, I mainly use it as a way to pull the samples out, you know, find the samples that work for the sound selection or the reference that I'm working on as far as production. But, you know, you can use it in a multitude of ways that kind of serves you and serves the way that your brain works. And I hope I was able to kind of show you the different ways of doing that. All right, guys, that's going to wrap it up. I hope this video helped you. Let me know if there's anything else that you guys want me to cover with XO, and I'll get that done. All right, see you in the next one. Peace.